recently with the July 2010 reports that HISD trustees just had to submit. And after looking at those, we raised a question of the transparency of the campaign finance of the school district with the campaign finance reports, because what we found out is HISD was posting the campaign finance reports online, but they basically were taking them and just whiting out addresses or whiting out phone numbers of people who had donated money, and then sometimes companies that the school trustees gave money to.
Right.
And I had went in a week before they published them online and saw that all of the information was intact, so it was not whited out. So what we did at Texas Watchdog is we actually went in and requested actual copies and then posted all of the documents online without the redacted version that HISD had online.
Right. And the reason why we did that was because the fact that addresses are on the campaign finance disclosure records is very important. It's very important to you and to me and for the whole idea of transparency. Without an address, Joe Smith could be any Joe Smith in Houston, could be any Joe Smith in Texas, could be any Joe Smith in the United States. But you as a citizen have a right to know who is funding the campaigns of your public officials, and you need more information to identify whether that's the Joe Smith who lives next door to you, or whether that's the Joe Smith who lives in Dallas and who owns a big computer company that does millions of dollars in business with the school district. And the best way to determine that is by getting Joe Smith's address. And so that's why the campaign finance laws in Texas require that information to be listed on that form. And it's also required on the campaign disclosure records in most states and with the Federal Election Commission for federal candidates. So that's very helpful information, and you have a right to get access to it and to use that and to see what you can come up with, either as a journalist or a citizen journalist or just an interested citizen. So we took the step of going around the school system, basically getting the original records and making them available ourselves.
And then some other things that I was looking at while looking at these records is, since they are sort of smaller campaigns, a lot of them didn't have a lot of money necessarily that like a person running for a state office might have, or a state senator or a national senator. But they sometimes would write checks to themselves, and that can be a great sort of place to look for information and to make sure that the money that if they're writing a check to themselves, are they really spending the same amount of money?
Right.
So are they not just taking $500 and then only spending $200 on their expenditure sheet? So
and then just blowing the other $300 on
whatever they want,
booze and strippers or something. Lord only knows.
So that was something I know for me to look at, and just look at if they're writing a check to themselves, okay, are they really spending that amount of money? And you can see that by looking at their expenditures that are listed, and then just give them a call and say, what did you spend the money on? Because sometimes they're not necessarily required to list the details of everything if the amounts match up.
Right. Laws pertaining to campaign finance vary from state to state. For example, there are limitations in many states, but not in Texas, on how much you can give to a campaign. But the reason why you would want to double check on these personal contributions, as Lynn says, is because you don't really know what they're spending the money on if they're writing a check to themselves. I mean, you can't, if there's no requirement that they document how they spent the money, then the $500 could have gone to either buy business cards and yard signs that say vote for me, or it could have gone to buy $500 worth of Jack Daniels. And in some states, candidates are not allowed legally to make those kinds of listings on their disclosure form. It's not good enough to say, well, I just wrote a check to cash for myself. They have to come in and back it up. And in Texas, there is a law that says that you cannot use money from your campaign finance account on what are called personal expenditures. And now that term has been loosely defined and has been argued over a great deal the past several years. I remember in one case the Ethics Commission said using it to pay your dry cleaning bill is a personal expenditure, But otherwise, they're pretty lax about what exactly you can do with that money.
And besides looking at campaign finance reports, another, speaking of conflict of interest, is just looking at conflict of interest policies that exist in the district. First of all, maybe a question is, do they even have any? I mean, that might be a good thing to look at.
Right, and if they don't, maybe that's a story in and of itself.
Right. And, here in HISD, they do have different ones for trustees. They also are in working on approving a new one for all employees, and just getting a hold of those policies or requesting the policies and seeing what exactly they are allowed to do and not allowed to do. What are they allowed to accept? What are they not allowed to accept? How much money can a lunch cost? Is it $50? Is it $100? Those are stories in just by themselves, but then also looking at the forms that are submitted. Let's say, you know that maybe a trustee or a school board member went out to dinner and then they don't put it down on their conflict of interest.
Right.
So, I mean, those are just great things to look at. I know in my experience with HISD most of the time, and we're putting up links to the stories, but they actually they say no conflicts, and they say they haven't accepted anything. So,
well, I think that's partly because the law here has a loophole in it big enough to drive a truck through. The law says that you don't have to disclose any gift as long, for example, say the gift was tickets to a Houston Texans football game. You're not required to disclose that as a school board member if you were in the presence of the vendor who gave you the ticket. Sort of like, as long as the person who's giving it to you is there, it's okay, which does not make any sense to me. It probably doesn't make much sense to most people with good sense at all.
And so that's just, I mean, those can be great stories just all the time, because I know with employees, they might be submitted twice a year, or just once a year. School trustee board members, it might be twice a year or once a year, so you can always look at those forms and publish them for everyone to see. And another sort of area of stories would be just the sources of funding of where where the money and where the programs that school districts are doing, where the money's coming from. It could be coming from local money, it could be coming from state money, it could be coming from the federal government, it also could be coming from private donations, which we've seen a lot of that recently here at the Houston Independent School District, private donations, and that can then lead to stories related to, okay, who is this private company, who is this nonprofit, who sits on their board, which was an interesting story that we found here at HISD. A school board member was sitting on the board of a foundation that had a contract with HISD, and then then the head of the nonprofit was actually basically moonlighting and working full time for both organizations.
And getting paid by both organizations, as far as we could tell.
Yes. So, I mean, those, just looking at the funding and where things are coming can be great. Some great ideas. I know stimulus money still is being spent in school districts across the country. The IDEA funding, special education, Title I funding. There have been a couple different stories that we've seen here at HISD. And also bond money is huge too, because I think you see that's actually voter approved in most cases, where they actually approved additional funding for schools. Well, what are the programs? What projects are being done with that? Who's sitting on the bond committee? Where's the money going? Who are the contractors that are involved?
We just had a major story that published actually that had to do with bond underwriting, and the Houston Independent School District was one of the clients that this particular firm had worked for. But I remember when I was a reporter working in Tennessee, I remember that something like 60% of many school systems' funds for their entire year's budget came from the state, and nearly all of the remainder came from property taxes, which is probably a fairly similar setup in many states. But you see that the private foundations are being set up, particularly for America's larger urban school districts, who feel like they just need more money for special programs, and they're just not getting a fair shake, they think, and they're asking people to donate because of the importance of education and keeping the community moving in the right direction.
And sort of the last area that I wanted to hit on is just social media and other ways of communicating, and other ways that basically I think that might be sort of a little more unique to school districts is the use of social media by parents, by teachers, by students, by employees. I know I have on my Twitter feeds, I have something set up that's just for anything mentioning HISD. And it's amazing to see, you know, what parents might say sometimes. They just sort of rifle it off on their Twitter username or something a student might actually say. And, you know, more and more students are on Twitter and not just the Facebook and LinkedIn and those kind of things. So it can be, first of all, to get the contact information and find out if the school board members are on Twitter, are on Facebook. Follow them, pay attention to what they're saying. I know, just, you know, something silly. I know one of the school board members here at HISD likes to tweet during the school board meetings about something that's not really even related to what's going on, but it's just interesting to see. And, you know, you can retweet it, you can reply at him, and he'll reply back, and it's interesting. It creates an interesting dynamic between you as a reporter or you as a citizen to watch what's going on, and it's sort of I don't know, I think sometimes people may not have a filter as much when they're using the social media.
That's probably true. And keep in mind that there are also ways that government officials can, just like all of us as users of social media. Lynn and I are both on Twitter a lot ourselves. Not only do we tweet as Texas Watchdog, but personally. Keep in mind that those social media outlets have ways in which people can communicate privately. For example, if you ever use Twitter, you may have seen people send a DM, a direct message, which is a private message. Depending on the public records laws in your state, direct messages sent by a public official, such as a school board member, may be public record if they're pertaining to public business. For example, in Texas, the law has been that if say a city council member sends an email to someone on their private email account, if that email pertains to city business, that email must be a public record. Now, the question of Twitter messages, Facebook, that kind of thing, sort of the next level of social media, has not been directly addressed by the legislature or the courts here, but I know the Freedom of Information Foundation of Texas is moving to push the laws to basically be expanded to cover social media in the same way that they cover email, so that the public will have a right to get private direct messages from public officials if they pertain to public business.
And that's why it's important, you know, to see, I think, you know, seeing who the players are and just looking them up on all the social networks. I know I spent some time doing that at first, you know, looking up the superintendent, looking up his chief of staff, looking up a top administrator, and then also parent advocacy groups, whether it's PTA. I know there's one here in Texas, Parent Visionaries, and they have their own Facebook group. That's how they communicate, pretty much just through Facebook, and they send out messages, and, you know, just ask if you can be a member and see, you know, if they'll allow you to sort of see what conversation is going on. And that's another thing. Quickly, parents are very valuable. They have, you know, they really care about education, especially when their children are the ones being educated by the public school system. They can be a great outlet of information, or even just questions, especially if you're new to a city like I have been, saying, you know, you might not be as familiar with the key players in the city as well as some of these parents who have had 2 and 3 kids go through the school system. So just, you know, oh, well, you know, who is this, and is there a connection here? Just developing those sort of relationships with key parents, I think, is also can be very, very helpful as you cover the education beat.
Yes.
And that's all we have right now for education, but feel free at any time if you want to contact all of our contact information. You can contact me, it's just Lynn at Texas Watchdog, or on Twitter, it's just L Walsh, that's WALSH, and JP, same thing.
Yes, that's me, that's me.
And we did just also want to say our next Trent TV will be October 26th, 11:30, same time. It's also a Tuesday, that's Central Time. We're going to be focusing on environmental investigative reporting.
Yes, ma'am. So send us your questions ahead of time. If you're interested to know more about how you, as a citizen or citizen journalist or as a journalist, can use open government records and basically journalism skills to find out more about environmental issues and problems in your community. If you have questions, go ahead and send them in, and we'll try to make sure that we get them answered. And if not, we look forward to seeing you on, I think it's the 26th, And please tune in and send us your questions then. We'll be looking forward to it.
Great. Thank you.
Thank y'all.